The big issue isn't whether or not this creator or that one watches questionable material. The big issue is that a lot of this stuff has become mainstream and has become normal. And even if I accepted the argument that Irish Laddie's anime wasn't problematic at all, well, what about the other list belonging to Vaush V? It's hard to say because that one was made private before I knew about it or saw it, let alone was able to archive it. So, out of luck there. A few days ago, I published a video that to a very narrow group of people was somehow viewed simultaneously as nothing and also so unbelievably incendiary that you would have thought that I had advocated for eating babies or something. So what did I say that was so utterly outrageous? I said that as a father of 2 young children, I believe that any effort to sexualize minors, including in anime, is awful, and that I was disappointed that one of my favorite creators had clearly watched several videos that I considered disgusting. Now, if you're a normie like me, you probably heard what I just said and thought, wait a second, there were people that were bothered by that? Well, unfortunately, yes, and they let me know it. So I thought that I should address the most common issues and concerns that have been raised about my last video. Now, given the number of concerns that I heard, I've decided to break down this video into the following sections. First, I'm going to go over my intentions and motivations with the original video. Then why my initial response seemed uncharacteristically heated. Then I'll move into the key criticisms, starting with the bad faith and plain stupid ones, and then moving into the good faith and perfectly reasonable critiques. So let's start then with my intentions and motivations. And the reason why we're going to start here is because the majority of criticisms that I received can only exist in one's mind if you really believed my intentions and motivations were anything other than what I clearly stated in the video. My motivation, again, as I said in the video itself, was that of a father of 2 young children who found a list that contained material that I found disgusting and concerning, and my intention was to share what I found, explain why it was concerning to me, and then instead of telling my audience how to feel about it, I simply encouraged them to look at the entire list for themselves and then come to whatever conclusions they wanted to. Those were my clearly stated motivations and intentions. However, a number of prominent Twitter leftists said, nah, we've decided those weren't your motivations or your intentions. We've decided instead that your motivations were deeply sinister and self-serving and rooted in a secret, raging hatred of LGBTQ people. In fact, you're starting to look a little bit like a Nazi, old man Landre. And now, to my naive shock, the followers of these prominent figures, without any hesitation, dutifully repeated the insistence that they knew my true evil motives. Now, we'll get to how this willful ignorance of my motives and intentions are connected to the most goofy critiques of my video in a bit. But first, we need to talk about why several of you noticed that I seemed a little bit more irritated than usual in my response to the outrage produced by my last video. Because my unique irritation here had everything to do with the inexplicable and frankly insane invention and assignment of so many completely bogus motives and intentions towards me. Now, to get an idea of why, Twitter users in particular noticed that I seemed especially teed off and extremely short on patience when the video came out. You have to take a look at what I was dealing with even before the video itself came out. So here's what I was dealing with the day before. And then in the hour leading up to the video's release, things got really weird and simply infuriating really fast. First, it was brought to my attention that a Twitter user named Gayfesh had apparently been trying to publicly blackmail me out of releasing the video, even though it had nothing to do with them and they had no way of knowing what the video would even say. But as I have since learned, Gayfesh is notorious for flying off the handle like this, but as nice and clean as it would be to simply write off one crazy person for saying some crazy shit into the void, what was so sad to see were the number of people who gave likes, comments, and retweets in support of what Gayfesh was trying to do. And frankly, it's hard for me to feel like I owe anything, even something as little and simple as an explanation, to anyone who supports or is frankly too cowardly to condemn publicly blackmailing people into silence. But I digress. Now, believe it or not, things got even more irritating and bizarre after that point. Because I was in a group chat with several large leftist content creators and leftist Twitter influencers, and when my video was scheduled for release and it became public, it was almost immediately shared in that group. And knowing that it would likely cause at least some amount of friction in the group, I said this. But then one particular creator in that group went absolutely berserk. Here, you can see for yourself. And this shit really pissed me off. And for two main reasons that this content creator cannot possibly understand. First, to say this and believe this after I said what I did, you'd have to believe that I would be willing to lie and use my kids for clout, which suggests that I value clout more than my own children. Now, I think it's safe to say that at least 90% of the people who were saying this sort of thing don't have children and almost certainly, thankfully, never will. But I promise you that as a parent, there is virtually no greater insult you could say than something like that. Which is why I responded to that insinuation in that group chat very succinctly and clearly by saying this. Secondly, logically, it made absolutely no sense. But they were so adamant about it, and one can only assume if this notion they're putting forward makes no sense at all and is so insulting, and yet they're so adamant about it, then that must mean that either A, they're so blinded with rage that they can't think straight, or B, they're so concerned about the video I made that they're willing to invent an insane storyline that casts me as an unabashed villain of some kind. And in either case, I'm just sitting here so perplexed, and I just keep asking myself, why? Why would they be that blinded by rage or concerned about a video that isn't even about them? It just doesn't add up, and frankly, I still don't have a good answer. But I also just don't really care that much considering who it was coming from. But like before, what really got to me wasn't just that these two creators lost it like this, but that no one in the group chat of these influential voices, these thought leaders on the left, told this creator to chill the fuck out. And not only that, but then that creator, of course, took their inexplicable outrage out to their audience, and then within minutes, I was overwhelmed by a tsunami of parroted comments. So while the creator's initial comments were what pissed me off right away, it was this mindless adoption of this creator's asinine insinuations and incendiary claims that just zapped me of my patience with just about everybody at that point. And more than that, it just zapped me of my faith in these scumbags that just a few days ago were liking all my tweets, sharing my stuff, but now were taking their turns, getting their cheap dings in off me. So I responded like a guy with no fucks left to give because that's where I was. And if you were on the receiving end of my grumpy responses and it chapped your cheek somehow, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. With that out of the way, let's get into the criticisms. Actually, psych! Before we do that, I think it's important to differentiate the groups of people who had something negative to say here. So please stick with me because there are 5 groups to talk about. Group 1 are people who are just openly pro-sexualized loli. Group 2 are people who are anti-sexualized loli, claiming that nothing on this list that I shared was problematic. Group 3 were people who were anti-sexualized loli, claiming that titles on this list that I shared were problematic loli, but that didn't matter in this case because, according to them, Vaush had said previously that he had watched some of these problematic forms of loli, but has since said on stream that he found them problematic and doesn't recommend them to other people. Then there's group 4, which are people who claim that the titles I was bothered by due to their content shouldn't be considered bothersome because they're mainstream popular anime titles. Group 5 are people who, depending on when and where they were criticizing me and what I said, argued from more than one of these groups, which to me immediately invalidates any of their criticisms because it tells me you're just willing to say anything to try to discredit me, and your motivation is a personal matter rather than a matter of principle. And we need to keep these groups in mind because of the way that they influence the criticisms and the way that I perceived their seriousness. For instance, I am going to instantly discard any opinions of someone who is openly pro-sexualized loli. But that's what's so interesting, because even though there is a ton of sexualized loli content out there, which is obviously being consumed by a massive number of people, virtually no one is going to come out and say that they are pro-sexualized loli, even if they are privately, because of how taboo it would be to say that, at least here in America. And that brings us to group 2 that claims to be anti-sexualized loli, but only because that's based on their own definition of what problematic sexualized loli is. Because think about it. If I draw the line of what constitutes problematic sexualized loli content over here, and another person draws it over here, to me, they're well over that line. But in their minds, they're still anti-problematic sexualized loli, as long as they don't cross that line, the line that they set for themselves. And so, to them, in cases like that, they're not lying. And this is one of the biggest underlying issues here. Sexualized loli content is simultaneously widely available and extremely taboo, but it's become so normalized in certain corners of the internet that the line of normal and acceptable has just gotten pushed incredibly far, and in my view, in a way that is incredibly disturbing. And this dynamic then essentially allows everyone to consume as much problematic loli as they want, while allowing them to still maintain that they're definitely not pro-sexualized loli in any way whatsoever. Group 3 runs into similar issues for me, which is a bummer because it seemed that most of the good faith, the truly good faith arguments that I had with people about this stuff were with people who landed in Group 3, which was interesting to me and very frustrating for them, because Group 3 were people that truly are not pro-sexualized loli content, but thought that I was wrong to make a video about this since Vaush had already said that he found some of the anime titles on his list to be too much. And I say this group was consistently frustrated with me because they did seem to be genuinely anti-sexualized loli content, accepted that I didn't have bad intentions, but also fully accepted the words of their favorite streamer that, like, sure, he may have watched some of this stuff, but he didn't like it. And this obviously very quickly gets us into some really weird and uncomfortable territory, but this is where these criticisms are taking us, so let's just try to get through it as quickly as we can. I understand that, take my word for it, works for a lot of people. I truly get it, but it just doesn't work for me, especially in cases like this. Because to me, I'm using, let's call it the babysitter test. If I was trying to get a babysitter for my 2 kids, and I had 10 candidates, and only one of them had watched any amount of sexualized loli content, it doesn't really matter to me if they say that they didn't like it. I mean, like, I guess that's good, but I'm just not going to run that risk because, like it or not, most normie parents like me would see that as a big red flag. But this is also where I think I lost most of my good faith audience, because what I didn't do was say, this doesn't mean I think he's a pedophile. because I assumed that I didn't need to. And frankly, that was my mistake. So just to get this clear, while I stand by my decision to raise a red flag here, it's just a flag, not a label, not a jacket. And no, even though this changes my personal views of Vaush, I don't think he's a pedophile. If I did, I would have handled this very differently. In fact, all you have to do is look back at how I handled things after my Mr. Girl documentary came out. I said that that was a line in the sand moment, and that there was no excuse to give him a platform ever again. You'll notice I didn't say that about Vaush, and I'm not going to, because at worst, I might personally be like, ew. But I don't think he needs to be deplatformed over this. I was disturbed by the list, and I raised a red flag because of it. Which, by the way, what's a red flag to me might not be for somebody else, and that's fine. But there's no reason to take your disagreement with my choice to raise a red flag, or what I think is a red flag, to the truly wild extremes that some people have over this. Now let's get to the meat of the video. We'll start with those bad faith and stupid criticisms. Like this one, you did this for the clout. This one is both bad faith and stupid. It's bad faith because I made it clear in my video, in the description of the video and on social media, what my motivations were for making that video. And since these reasons obviously didn't include clout, choosing to grab crap like this out of thin air is obviously just meant to serve your argument. And it's a stupid argument because there is significant overlap between my fan base and Vaush's, with Vaush's obviously being substantially bigger than mine. So why the hell would anyone think that I would have a net gain of clout over sharing even mildly unflattering opinions about Vaush? That just wouldn't make any sense. In fact, I predicted that this video, or the last one, would upset a lot of my subscribers, and I invited them to unsubscribe if they felt so inclined. And just like I expected, I didn't gain any freaking clout from this. But that's fine, because some people are just not in it for those reasons. Then there's this one. This video proves that Landry is anti-queer and anti-trans. This one really pissed me off because I have been a strident ally of LGBTQ people for as long as I can remember. And then you had prominent LGBTQ voices on Twitter insinuating and sometimes just outright saying wild shit like I was targeting Vaush because he identifies as queer. And then I'm trying to jump on the anti-queer bandwagon with the likes of Shoe on Head. That one is just so insane that I can only assume that anyone who is saying something so dumb must form all of their opinions from deep inside their colon shortly before pulling it straight out of their ass and sharing it with the world. Then there's this one. Laundry can't take any criticisms. This one is just plain silly because this one is always said by people on Twitter who I just recently blocked, and for good reason. I will explain. I block people on Twitter who I have determined, in my view, are one or more of the following. 1, impressively dumb. 2, full of shit. Or 3, remarkably annoying. So if you got hit by a block from me over this, well, there you go. Now you know. I love engaging with intelligent, respectful, normal adults, and my replies and DMs bear that out. But I can't take feedback that is just plain dumb, especially when it's delivered by people who are just plain full of shit and are remarkably annoying. Then there's this one. This is all mainstream stuff. Well, first of all, no, it's not. Sure, some of it is, and that is actually the biggest problem, which I said in the description of the video, but a lot of it isn't mainstream. Now, sure, we could get into a long thing about, oh, well, mainstream in America is different from what's mainstream in Japan, and blah, blah, blah. But let's just not do that, at least not right now. I shared Irish Laddie's full list with several people who are serious anime buffs and asked them to tell me if any of the 204 titles on that list are outside of the mainstream in terms of their sexualized content involving obvious minors. And they all came back with at least a few titles that made them uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, one of the very interesting patterns that I noticed in the comments and messages that I got from people who tried to quell my concerns over the anime on Irish Laddie's list were messages and comments like this. Yeah, Landre, I get where you're coming from, but this is all really mainstream stuff. Except for maybe this one. But those exceptions were never the same. So even amongst the people who watch a lot of anime, there wasn't even agreement among them about what was a bridge too far. But the real issue here is that, oh, it's just mainstream, isn't an excuse even if it's factually accurate. In fact, the very fact that it is mainstream is the biggest problem. And if I'm not mistaken, oh yeah, I wrote those very frickin' words in the description of the video. The big issue isn't whether or not this creator or that one watches questionable material. The big issue is that a lot of this stuff has become mainstream and has become normal. And even if I accepted the argument that Irish Laddie's anime wasn't problematic at all, well, what about the other list belonging to Vaush V? It's hard to say because that one was made private before I knew about it or saw it, let alone was able to archive it. So, out of luck there. Old man Landre, you're being racist. Yeah, about that. So, the contention made by some people was that because there are cultures, in this case, in Japan specifically, where sexualization of minors is very much culturally accepted, including in forms far more extreme than anything on the list that I referenced in my last video. They felt that by expressing my disgust in anime that sexualizes minors, I am somehow racist against Japanese people. Now, I don't know what kind of brainworms a person has to actually think that that's how racism works, but that's not how racism works. I also just have to throw in there that despite never being accused previously of being a Nazi, just a few days after my last video came out, I suddenly had a number of people who I was on perfectly good terms with before the video came out, coming at me on Twitter trying to make the case that my new emblem, which is literally just a stylized version of my initials, OML, and is designed to be an homage to one of my favorite bands, Linkin Park, well, apparently my emblem looked to them as being suspiciously similar to an obscure skinhead logo, and that it was a bad look and coming at a bad time. Which brings us to the last bad faith and otherwise stupid critique I got over and over. Landre, this is such a reach. This one, like many critiques before it, is both bad faith and stupid, and goes hand in hand with the very first dumb criticism, which was that I was doing this for clout. So let's just get this straight for all the glue eaters out there. Reaching is when someone over-exaggerates facts to validate their own opinion. A person who is reaching is so desperate to get other people to share their view that they're willing to embellish the truth and just make things up. A good example of this might be, I don't know, maybe somebody who's so desperate to discredit me and score some cheap clout by dunking on me on Twitter that they'd say things like, look, Landre's transphobic. Oh, actually, he's racist too. In fact, he might even be a Nazi. On the other hand, if you think that I was reaching for something based on what I actually expressed in my video, you probably shouldn't be allowed to handle sharp objects, considering that what I actually said, and with great clarity in my actual video, was, hey, here's what I found, look at it for yourself, and you're free to come to whatever conclusions and opinions you want on your own. But here are mine. I'm sorry, but that's not reaching. That is just expressing a view that you don't like. So now let's wrap it up with some good faith and perfectly reasonable criticisms. Like, Landre, you don't understand anime, so you probably shouldn't comment on it. This is an understandable critique, but it's also completely illogical. First of all, if we applied this logic to the same political streamers who leveled these criticisms against me, fine, I'll stay in my lane and you can stay in yours. But let's think about what that would actually mean for a second, shall we? Since I'm not experienced with the subject of anime like you, I shouldn't be talking about anime, right? Okay, then every political streamer who's lacking in any sort of real-world political experience and can only point to a few years of pontification to an audience who also lacks meaningful real-world political experience, well, then they all have to immediately cease discussions of politics too. And if I'm right on this, yeah, let me check my notes here. Yeah, it says right here that would mean that 9 out of 10 political streamers are gonna have to find other stuff to talk about real quick because they all have no political experience to speak of, whereas I have over a decade of political experience. Now, how goofy of an argument is that? For many, the issue at the heart of my video was primarily an anime issue. But for me, the creator of the video, it's not an anime issue, which makes this a largely moot point to begin with. This is an issue for me about the sexualization of minors in media, being given a pass if we're talking about anime. You don't need to be a full-blown weeb to know what a minor looks like and when a minor is being sexualized. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that this is a 50% anime issue and a 50% sexualization of minors issue. If anime aficionados get to talk about this subject, then as a father of 2 young children, I get to talk about it as well. But if me being a father isn't good enough to be able to talk freely about this subject, then you being into anime isn't enough either. But of course, again, this is all just silliness. You don't need to be an experienced real-world political professional in order to share your views on politics. You don't need to be a parent to know when an animated character is meant to look like a child. And you don't need to be an expert in anime to talk about anime you find problematic. So I just reject this whole argument out of pocket. But here's the other thing. This criticism has a very valid underlying notion, which is that if you're gonna talk about a subject that you're not deeply familiar with, there are a few things that you really should do. First, have enough self-awareness to know what you don't know. 2, be transparent with your audience when that is the case. And then 3rd, consult with experts or otherwise knowledgeable people who do know a lot about the subject at hand. And I will check my notes again. Yup, I did all of those things. Here's the next one. Words, 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 accusations. Words, 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 allegations. Words, 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 be more careful. Many critiques I got centered around the claim that I accused or alleged something awful about Vaush. However, this is completely imagined, because I never accused or alleged Vaush did anything. In fact, if you watch the original video again, you'll see that I took great care not to accuse or allege anything of Vaush, which is ironic because I got so many comments saying that I needed to be more careful of what I said. But these sort of comments could only come from someone who wasn't listening carefully to what I was actually saying. Now, let's be clear about a couple things. First, statements of fact are not accusations or allegations. Second, saying this appears to be the case, but I hope I'm wrong and I invite corrections, is also not an accusation or allegation. So, 3, when the thesis of my last video was, I found this list that belongs to a user named Irish Laddie, that is a fact. And so too was it a fact when I said, and Vaush is known to use that username. That's a fact too. And when I said, here's why the contents of this list disgust me and leave me disappointed in Vaush if this is his list, that's an opinion. In other words, the entire video is framed around 2 statements of fact and 1 opinion, mine. Nowhere in the video did I make an unsubstantiated statement about Vaush, which would be an allegation. In fact, I purposefully used Vaush's name as few times as possible, and instead made sure only to use the username of the person who created the list on my animelist.net, because I didn't want to wander into the area of allegations. So if you believe that I made allegations, I'm sorry, you are believing in a fantasy, either one that you've created for yourself or that somebody created for you. But the last critique we're going to talk about is probably the most reasonable of all, which was, Why didn't you contact Vaush before releasing the video? Again, this is a perfectly reasonable question. Unfortunately, though, I have a feeling my honest answer will be entirely unsatisfactory to a lot of you, but here are the reasons why I chose not to contact Vaush for this video. First, I don't trust any streamers. I've made this clear on numerous occasions. Can that trust be earned? Sure, but for me, as a 32-year-old man with over a decade of political experience under my belt, I have learned the hard way, many, many times over, that trust is not something to just give to somebody. It's something a person has to earn. And depending on who you are, it's a lot more difficult to earn my trust. And from my experience, the personalities of streamers is nearly identical to politicians. And since it's incredibly hard for a politician to earn my trust after having worked with so many of them, the same is true for streamers as well. And unfortunately, my reticence to just hand over trust to commentary streamers has been repeatedly validated, as it seems like almost every day a new streamer demonstrates that they are completely untrustworthy, or at the very least hold all the hallmarks of an untrustworthy person. Even more unfortunate, though, than the way that streamers mirror modern politicians in so many ways, we also can't avoid the fact that their most loyal fans often mirror the most cult-like, unquestioning loyalty to their favorite streamers, and don't hold their favorite streamers to the same standards that they hold other streamers to. And this, of course, leads to massive blind spots. And that's why, even though, like many of my subscribers, Vaush is one of my favorite streamers, when it comes to basic matters of trust, I'm not going to suddenly just go with a different standard. The fact is, I treated Vaush like any other streamer. And this leads to a really important fork in the road. Because if you didn't like that I treated him the same way as any other streamer I've covered up to this point, then either A, you want me to be a hypocrite and treat him differently, or B, you're being hypocritical. Because I've covered many people outside of the VGG universe, and I've applied these standards to them, and you haven't had any problems with that until now. So when I say that I treated him the same way as everybody else, let's talk about what I mean by that. First, I don't ask streamers about known information that can be verified without their input. Second, I don't need to ask a streamer for permission to share my feelings about known verifiable information, just as they don't need to ask me for permission to respond to my material or anybody else's. Third, some facts make anyone instantly untrustworthy to me, including finding that you've watched any amount of anime featuring sexual depictions of children in anime videos. Again, this has been my approach with every other streamer that I've covered up to now, and it hasn't been an issue until now. And I know that a lot of you will not like that answer, but it's the truth. And so with all of that stuff being said, with all those critiques being covered, damn, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was another real fun one. I wanted to get this out before the new year so that we could just get it out in 2022 and move on into the new year and never have to deal with it again. But somehow I don't think that's going to work out that way. Happy New Year. If you liked the video, do the thing, comment, like it, share it, do that stuff. If you didn't, I don't even have to tell you what to do because I have a really solid feeling you're going to do all the things anyway. You're probably going to smash the dislike button, which is fine. You're probably going to leave a bunch of nasty comments. That's fine too. And you're probably going to do some things on other social media platforms, but you know what? I still love you anyway. And I hope you too, especially you, have a fabulous new year. Did I forget anything else? Checking my notes that don't actually have any notes on them. Nope. I got it all out. We donezo. Peace out, yo.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
I love the young people.